I'm Bob, a compulsive overeater, alcoholic, and my problem is Bob. I go to the food a lot of times, and I'll go to there right now with our compulsion with food. Either we're overeating, undereating, anorexic, bulimia, binge eating, all of these different things. So what's the solution? And we say a lot of times we use the expression we're either in the problem or in the solution. Made me think of step 11. Step 11 to me is a solution. Any other way I tried to do it didn't work because step 11 says our higher consciousness contact, right? It says exactly sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. It's really interesting that how is this related to our compulsions with food? Again, we could have different types of compulsions or any compulsion we have in life. So how is that directly related to that? Improving conscious contact with a higher power, and how is that, as it says in the big book, and resolve all of our problems? So it's telling us here, our conscious contact means another way of living. What was our conscious contact before? Was it with our addictions, right? With the material things outside of us, people, food, either controlling it again or over consuming it. Binge eating is one of them, right? Compulsive eating we talk about. We also talk about anorexia, bulimia, these things where we try to control. It's our compulsion. What is our compulsion related to? It's related to the self. Page 62 says selfishness, self-centeredness. So what is the solution to our whole problem here? Well, up to now, the solution has been what? Trying to control it. The more we try to control something, more power we give it. So we're saying to ourselves, well, if I control it this way, I have a diet, if I have a different type of thinking, if I try to control my thinking, try not to be obsessive about the food in either direction, then I'll solve my problem. What I'll do is, also it says prayer meditation. Why does it say both? Because meditation gets us centered, and also prayers talked about faith, the grace of a higher consciousness. We had this, it's inside of us all the time. Some people say, well, I don't believe, what is this change of grace of God or what you're talking about here? If you get out of the self is the problem. It's the self when we think about it. Every time you're upset, every time you're into addiction, it's always about the self. The self says, I know what I can do. I can have more food, more of this, less of this, or control this. If we're controlling our addictions, have more alcohol, more drugs, have more people like me. How about that one? So here's the whole solution, whole answer. It tells us right in these steps. Pretty amazing that it's right in front of us, and a lot of times we don't pick it up because sometimes people have been in these meetings for years and years and years, and then what happens when you ask them, they talk about they're in the problem, not the solution. So every day when I wake up and I'm remorseful, guilt, and shame, these are defects of character. So here we go. When we get prayer meditation, we're in the eternal presence. Eternal presence with our higher power. We're in the present, not the past. I always say planning the past or regretting the future. So with our food addiction or our addiction to drugs, alcohol, or people, if we wake up and we have guilt, shame, remorse of any of those compulsions we have, then we're back into the self-centered fear. It says in the book here that that's the corrosive thread throughout our lives. On page 65, it talks about when we do the columns, why does it have all the way in the third column there, everything's bracketed fear? When we get out of self, we have a higher consciousness. We're not fearful of our addictions anymore. Again, when we try to control it, we give it power. So what happens? Here it is. There may be 50, 100 ways you could get that same elation out of other things in life through nature, for God's presence and God's consciousness, in people and situations than you can get with your addictions to food. Again, controlling it or overeating, whatever you're doing, or alcohol, drugs, or people. We're looking again, it's called momentary pleasure. We're looking on the outside. But when we come in, the way out is in. When we get centered, and through the prayer, step 11, prayer meditation. And it also says, what's interesting about when you read step 11, we really have to read it and take it in our heart, not intellectualize it. Improve our conscious contact so we can be reborn in page 63. We could have a really upset day. I was watching a video, and I passed it around to some people, but anyway, it talks about this guy is upset about things, and he's like down and out. And he walks out of this building, and he goes in the street, and some guy says, do you know God loves you? As a person, So he was saying to him, and then and he gave him a sticker that said that. The next morning he woke up, he had a whole different perspective, because he wasn't coming from the finite, the little things like we do with our addictions and people. He saw the universe what it was because he opened up. He had that spiritual awakening. So here he is. He did it the next morning. But we wait, what, 20, 30, 40 years? How many years we tried to do this? But I always say this right here, right now at this meeting, if you want that spiritual awakening, get out of the self. It tells us here. When we get centered, and look, here's the thing with the food. When you're in self-centered fear, guilt, shame, remorse about what you did, you're into the ego, the self. So then we're off-center. 9-step promises that we'll intuitively know how to handle situations and problems. But when we get in self-centered fear, we are paralyzed by fear. You want to do your diet or whatever you're doing. You want to get that job you want. You want to be happy around people and be happy, joyous, and free. Prayer, meditation. That's what it's all about. Sometimes, at a meeting, somebody will hold up a flower, and sometimes these Eastern things I went to, and they hit a gong, because it was all the answers are in the eternal present. The answer to your addictions to food are in the eternal present. But when we get into the self, we're into the material again, the ego. The ego steers us wrong all the time. Our best thinking God is here. And it says praying only, this is step 11, for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So people say, I have to use my will in life. And it says here, yes, use your will, but only for God's will. What's God's will? Patience, love, tolerance. Being, not being gluttonous towards the food. Why they call gluttony one of the 7 deadly sins. So when we get centered and we think, I love this phrase, abstinence tastes better than food. What it's saying is that if you change your thinking and want that lean feeling, want to feel your stomach, not that bloated feeling. On the other side, it could be any other addiction you have and perception you have towards it. I mean, if you're restriction, you could look at food and enjoy it. It's all in the mind. Some people want to restrict it. Some people want to enjoy it. So the answer is in here. It's all in here because there's nothing anybody can teach you or tell you don't already know. God consciousness will give the answer to all our problems. So we get centered, like when you meditate and you think they call it chakras, and you feel that presence in your, as you come up from the solar plexus, and you can actually feel your stomach. So if your stomach, look, our bodies, we were made in perfection. Our bodies, when you get out of self, is the best thermostat when it comes to our addictions with food. It'll tell us when we had too much, when we had too little. That's called a normalcy. It says a position of neutrality, it talks about in the 10-step promises, not even having to sworn off. We have stopped fighting anyone or anything. So the answer is counterintuitive to what we think it is. And Bill's story says common sense becomes uncommon sense. So again, why would I say to you, look, if the next morning you wake up or now you're down on yourself about your addiction, why is it prayer, meditation? Because God will give you the answer inside of us. Look, you could take it to a lot of levels and different things. Say somebody wants to go out and get a job and they're trying by the self-will and they say, I got to go do this, I got to do that during the day. That's called self-will. Sit down and get centered. And then you'll find yourself having love and compassion for the world. So even it won't matter if you get rejected or people say no to you, and you'll go out there and you enjoy it for what the world is about. Feel the vibrations and love around you. But when we get into the self, we can't even move. We're paralyzed by fear.